Thank you all so much for sticking around for our Q&A now. I'd like to introduce the writer, director, cinematographer, producer, Alessandro Nanau. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about Collective.
Thanks a lot for having me.
I'm very curious to know about the starting point of this project. The film tells us about the tragedy that happened at the nightclub, and then we learned that caused protests that toppled the government. But whereas that could have been the starting point for your film to sort of explore what happened there, you take us past that into the ongoing, unfolding sort of real life investigations that are happening from the Sports Gazette. And I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about your decision to start the film at that point.
Yeah, I think that that came basically with what reality offered us, because my first trigger to tell the story, or to try to see if it is possible at all to make an observational documentary about what is going on in the aftermath of the fire, because the fire basically started an emotion, let's say, or a movement in society where, young people took the streets of several cities. We had the biggest demonstration since 30 years, since the revolution. So I felt that it was a turning point in society, and having not, growing up in Romania, I was waiting somehow for a moment in the Romanian society to change. I mean, for a young generation to take over, for what happened a bit in the West in '68, when a young generation really, in Germany, most of all, got rid of the Nazi generation of their parents, and it was still, former Nazis in state institutions. And that was what was happening in Romania after the fire. And we were looking, basically, we mapped a lot of characters that were involved in this. Victims, parents, doctors, politicians, journalists, in order to try to meet and to see who could be strong enough and interesting enough characters to lead us through this story and to shadow them. And one of my initial needs was basically the need to understand how power works. How do people in power basically step on others' lives, and who are these people? Why are they capable of doing that? But I did not have access to power in the beginning, and so we figured that the best way would be to shadow this journalist's work that we then shadowed in the film, because they were the only journalists that really started to investigate the manipulation that took place, the lies that they spread about the Romanian healthcare system being capable of treating these burn patients. And we started from there, but once we started to film with the journalists, things just took on such a speed, revelations, corruption, that we just went with the flow, and we just tried to understand what was started basically in the society, also by one whistleblower.
There's a moment in the film where someone is basically, I think there's someone in the public who's exasperated by the corruption going on. They point out that it's only the sports newspaper that's bothering to uncover all of this corruption. Yeah. And I'm curious, over the course of making the film, if you ever got a satisfying answer to that question. Why is it that it's specifically them and not the more traditional news media that's taking on this, this kind of corruption? And did they inspire change across other newspapers? I mean, what's like?
I think, I'm not sure if they inspired change so much as the investigations that we see in the film and that took place in Romania really changed the relationship between citizens and the press. They really gave the press back something they had lost. And that's also an answer to the question, why them? Because the whistleblowers chose them, basically. The whistleblowers did not have did not trust the other media, and the other media, most of it is owned by moguls that are close to the power, or even if not, you know, they try not to attack the power too much, because you don't know. I mean, they have things funded by the state and so forth. So it was basically, they were known in Romania. They were investigative journalists. They did investigations since over 25 years, but they did it in the sports world. And they did investigate politicians before, but politicians that were, you know, that were basically part of the sports world, like sports ministers that were corrupt. They investigated them, they went to trial, and then 2 sports ministers had to go to jail. The big soccer bosses of the country had to go to jail after the investigations and the trials. So they were known as dodgy journalists and feared by politicians. But that said, they had no experience in the healthcare system. But because the whistleblower went to them, and because the rest of the media was not doing anything, basically, they were just propagating what the authorities were saying, they felt obliged. It was a national tragedy, and they felt obliged to, you know, to use their skills in the healthcare system, which was also another, it had another advantage. It had the advantage that the decision makers in the healthcare system and the other, you know, doctors thought, oh, these are just sports journalists. They're anyway too stupid to understand anything. So they will just ask some stupid questions and then go away, which was an advantage for them.
I'm curious, not knowing, of course, what's going to unfold in the course of the year that you're following them. What was the agreement that you made with them in the beginning in terms of how long you would be with them, what kind of access they were going to have? It seems like the relationship that you as a filmmaker have to their whistleblowers also changes. In the beginning, you're sort of you're like in another building almost, it seems like, with a long telephoto lens. Later in the film, you're in the room with them. So tell us what sort of parameters you set with the journalists and how you would enter their space.
Yeah, I will tell you a bit about the relationship to the whistleblowers, but then this image that you described around a building, that's interesting because it's a, you know, in terms of how you find solutions for problems, it's a nice story. So the thing is that the journalists, once they decided to trust us, I think, although they were, you know, still anxious that things might you know, information might go out of the newsroom and so forth, I think it was a big sign of their trust when I told Cătălin Tolontan, who was basically also the editor-in-chief, I told him, listen, I really wish for you to let me film anything. Like, don't try to, you know, don't try to hide things. And he said, fine, we'll do that. And I said, as a sign of trust, what we can do, we can, you know, store the footage in a place that we both know and is safe. And so that you know that it will not leave, basically, before you come out with the investigation. And he said, no, we trust you totally. And we knew, for example, that we were surveilled by the Secret Service, that they were taping my phone. And we basically every evening copied the footage on multiple sources, hid it in secret places, also flew it out of the country and protected it with a company outside the country, just to be cautious that nobody really, you know, can harm the project. And with the whistleblowers, I think that once we started, the journalists never imagined that we will really follow them for such a long time. They thought like, okay, this will go on for days, maybe weeks, but then it became longer and longer. And with the whistleblowers, we had an understanding, and they said, okay, we can tell you the day they come in, that somebody will come in. We can't tell you before. So you will know it the same day. And then you can have 5 minutes with them and explain them what they're doing, who you are. And if they let you film them, it's fine. If not, please leave the newsroom and let us do our work. Most of the meetings were at night when the whistleblowers would come in. So we were lucky because we explained to the whistleblowers what we're doing. We explained them that we're going to shoot for a much longer time, maybe another year, and then edit maybe another year. So we will not release anything. And once we have edited a film, they had the possibility to watch the footage with us, I mean, the editing scenes with them, and decide at that moment in time if they still want to go public once the film is finished. So luckily for us, they agreed. But there was also, for example, a whistleblower that wanted more protection and wanted to be obscured. And we met the whistleblower and we started to think about ways to film while she is, blowing the whistle in a way that we can obscure the face. And then I realized that it will not work because, it's an observational film. Everything you see, there's a convention between you as a storyteller and the viewer that everything he's seeing or she's seeing was captured. The filmmaker learned it at the same moment. Nothing is in scenes, nothing is, everything happens in the moment we filmed it. And so I figured this will not work stylistically and it will, throw out the viewer of the film. And so we decided not to film with that whistleblower. It was just not working. And with the first whistleblower, for sure, we also had, we knew the whistleblower. We knew that at a certain point, she will be fine to be filmed. It just needed a process. And it's basically the same whistleblower that brought the worms into the video with the maggots, and it is sitting at the minister later. She's basically source number 0, and it started the whole story. And I just did not find any way to obscure this, to obscure her and her face during this meeting without falling into very cliche traps of reportage or, having the problem that the viewer will then feel, oh, there's somebody filming and they planned this, it had to be obscured and so forth. And then I basically, while having this problem for days, because I knew it would, she would come in and the day came more near. And one evening I went to the newsroom and just saw through a window that there was a reflection in the next building of the room they're normally meeting people in.
Ah, okay.
And that's when I realized, okay, so we can, it can be sound, but we can film basically from the same building, but from another angle, the meeting, and everybody will be happy.
Since time obviously passed between when you filmed the whistleblowers and the film coming out, and we know that there was, as the end of the film tells us, there's big political changes that happen. Was the release of the film even, I guess, even more important for the world to sort of see what they're revealing, or had at this point their identities become kind of under like common knowledge within the industry that they were exposing? I mean, I guess my question is, did the release of the film make the whistleblowers safer or less safe in terms of people knowing who they are?
I think that it made them safer, but for sure the whistleblower number 0, basically that started all, she was known in the healthcare system as being the snitch. People knew that she's doctors knew for sure. I think she even was at that point in time already, like somebody posted it on Facebook that she was basically the whistleblower. So she became known as the whistleblower, which was not the same for the accountants that blow the whistle. But I think it made them safer in more ways. Not only that, the fact that they were exposed, but also the fact that when we launched the film, it had a big impact in the country. A lot of people saw it, and it was really the protection of so many people that were, in solidarity with them and that really understood through the storytelling what they did and why they did it. Because even many journalists that came to see the film said, listen, I lived through all this and I even wrote about everything, but I think I forgot most of it. Like only now seeing it in a story, I understand basically the meaning of it all.
Mm.
The meaning that the work of the press really had during this year, and how it really changed the perception in society, and even society, and also the perception about the healthcare system.
Mm-hmm. Did you say that you found out that the Secret Service was tapping your phone?
Yeah.
How did you discover that, first of all? And
Oh,
you know,
by
what
a
relationship did you have with the powers that be, so to speak, when you were filming press conferences with government officials, things like that?
Basically, I discovered it through a source inside the system, inside the Secret Service. And at first I didn't want to believe it, and then the source started reading me out loud the numbers that I was called from in the last time, you know, from France, I was just releasing a film in France. I had a lot of phone calls with France and with Germany, and that's when I believed it. Basically, I said, okay, good. Fine. And then I was also, when we started to film in the ministry, I was told by staff of the ministry that they were summoned, or how do you call it, they were called in and questioned about me and my presence in the ministry. But I think these are normal things that every service is doing, basically, to gather information. You know,
did you exploit that to give them some misdirection as to where you would be filming, or?
No, because I was aware that they would think that I'm a bit stupid, because I think they could. I was aware that nobody could imagine why I film all these things, why I'm close to these investigative journalists, and I do not release anything. You know, these people could not imagine what documentary filmmaking really is. They could imagine what reportage making is for television, or, you know, and so the fact that so much time passed and these investigations would come out, but I would not release anything from the things I filmed, I think it made them just think I'm just not interesting or a threat to anybody.
But then you switch from filming with journalists to actually filming, you know, people within the government. So tell us about that switch, because obviously the Minister of Health, the new Minister of Health, is incredibly transparent in allowing you to film with him.
Totally.
But how did the rest of the, I mean, like, he can't be the only person involved in that decision, right? Does he have?
He could, in the ministry, he could. That was the good thing. Because we tried, before we filmed with him, we tried to get transparency and access to the Prime Minister, and he didn't even bother. I mean, we talked to his team that was really sorry that he was behaving that way, because he promised transparency. He was heading basically a government of technocrats that promised transparency. But then when we heard that they're interviewing this outsider, basically, for the job as the new Minister of Health, that's when I thought that it could be my chance to finally get into the power structure and really make a film from inside the power structure. And so I tried to get to him, and he responded in a week or 10 days and agreed to a meeting. And basically, I mean, he was 33 years old. He was from outside the political system, which means he didn't owe anybody anything, because that's the problem, is the lack of transparency in politics, right? Everybody owes somebody something. So if one of them gives access or makes it transparent, other people will be, you know, other party members, let's say, will be angry and will have something to blackmail him with, and, you know, make him understand why transparency is just a no-go for politics. But that was not the case with this guy. He was really, he lived outside Romania before, and was a patients activist working in a bank in Vienna. And so he and his team, he gathered a young team of professionals from around the world, basically. And he said, transparency is one of our main goals. We really think we have to bring back transparency to the healthcare system, most of all because health is a basic right in our constitution, and people have all the right to know what decisions we're taking here and upon which criteria. but be aware that they will hate you and they will hate me for this. I mean, in this ministry, it's one of the most corrupt ministries in the country. They will just not understand anything. And so we agreed again that I would be able to film anything. I would for sure ask people if they come in, if they want to be filmed, but if, you know, nobody was against it, we would just go on. And as you can see in the film, they got so used to it that they, you know, they didn't mind anymore. And we were able even to film while a healthcare official tries to persuade the minister not to tell the truth about the fact that they authorized a lung transplant, although the hospital was not prepared, but politically it was an order.
That's truly one of the most shocking moments in the film, that that person would allow that conversation to be recorded.
He didn't know.
He didn't.
The one on the other end of the line?
I mean, well, that's sort of a question for you as a documentary filmmaker. I mean, you're filming this guy in his office, but someone calls in and expects the conversation to be private.
Yeah, but that is covered by freedom of speech. So this is covered by law, and it's covered by freedom of speech, and it concerns the public health. And in the lawmaking in Europe, at least, freedom of speech implies that whatever is harmful to citizens has to be exposed.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I think it's one of the most revealing and important moments in the film. I'm just shocked that you were able to get it.
Yeah, I was also shocked while it happened, you know, because when I made the film, I mean, you know, it was like, I tried to also, the way I made the film, I tried to reproduce basically my own feeling of revelation after revelation and shock after shock, because, you know, you discover the things that, you know, that people are capable of lying, they can treat these patients and knowing that they will die or get infected. Then, you know, companies dilute the disinfectants. Then the Secret Service knew for 10 years, politicians knew. So, and I was really, I had the feeling that for the first time I did understand Hannah Arendt's The Banality of Evil, how it really works.
Right.
You know, how, you know, it adds up to something that's horrifying, where everybody is part of it and nobody wants to admit that he is participating in
it. The other moment that seemed really like almost, you know, fate that you happened to be there in filming was when the launch of the attacks over the lung transplants, which, you know, at first you're sort of, you know, as a viewer, sort of like interested in where this is going, and then of course it becomes a huge part of the film. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was that in fact the first time he had been confronted by that issue, or was it just?
Yeah, I think it was part of the. I think it was part of destroying basically his image. Although he was not a candidate for the elections or anything, he was a technocrat, right? So he had a limited mandate and would go out. But they used him basically with their media that is resembling, I guess you could recognize a lot, Fox News, in the way they do reporting and the way they address topics. And that was basically just, I think it was part of a whole campaign plan. Like, this was the most transparent, most visible minister in this government. So everything they did was attacking him and trying to, you know, to win notoriety in a very populistic manner on his back, because the mayor of Bucharest at that time, she was voted out. As you can see in the film, says, oh, this minister is giving away the Romanian lungs that are, you know, that are meant for our Romanian citizens, and is sending patients off to Vienna to get surgery in Vienna. So he was doing that because it was safe, you know, and the state was paying for it. And he preferred to know that people were surviving the lung transplant than to do it in Romania, where he knew it was authorized without being prepared.
structurally, and maybe because this becomes such a big part of the story, it does feel like once you really get embedded with the Minister of Health, that the focus sort of shifts towards that side of the government, as opposed to the journalists who come back with obviously important work later in the film. But I'm curious if you were still shooting with both simultaneously.
Yes.
That was more of an editing choice or a production choice?
No, it was a production choice. So besides the fact that I was aware that it would be a challenge in the editing room to change the main character in the middle of the story. But as I felt, if I emotionally can understand it in real life, I will find a way to translate it in the story structure. And then professionally, basically, there were days when we were basically shooting in both locations, and I was running in between them. I was filming how, for example, the journalist would prepare to come out with something, with an investigation that surely would, set off a bomb in the ministry. But it was very clear, and everybody respected professionally, that I am in both places. I see things that both sides would like to know, but we will never talk about it. And, I will never tell them what I see on the other side. And I think that, observational filmmaking has to have this objectivity, but also in a way, maybe something like coldness in observing human behavior. And for sure, I was, when I knew that an investigation would come out in the morning, I was the first in the ministry to wait for everybody to see how they handle it. But vice versa, there was a moment where the journalists realized that I knew something way before them. And, like, you knew this? Like I said, yeah, I even filmed it, I knew.
Did their relationship to you change?
No, not at all, because there was a moment of, why didn't you? Oh, no, thank you. Yeah. Oh, great. I mean, great that we can trust each other, like that was, that was the understanding. And, this sort of moments even help to build even a greater bond, but not in terms of we are in the same boat, because I'm still somebody who is observing them, but for the people you film to trust you, and not only to trust you that you won't judge them, but also to trust you professionally, that, whatever you do, you will be, you won't violate your own integrity as a professional.
I wanted to ask you about the third major character, really, Teddy, the survivor of the fire, who is then the subject of those incredible photographs. And the photograph in particular that the minister has up in his office is really, like, from a cinematic standpoint, incredibly powerful, because you're constantly confronted with, yes, this is the tragedy. Don't forget about the human face of it, as they're grappling with so much of the corruption and bureaucracy. And I'm just curious to know when you got involved with Teddy in telling her part of the story, because it does wind up becoming such a recurring image just based on the placement of the photograph behind his desk. And then obviously there's a bond that they have, because he goes to the show, he's talking to her about the importance of voting and stuff like that.
Yeah, that has more layers to it, because so basically the picture appeared in his office. Obviously, he was in contact with the photographer, and the photographer, I think, gave him the thing as a present. So I just came one day and the thing was there. And I learned that the photographer basically brought it to him, knowing that he's very much close to these people and so forth. But there's also a backstory that we decided not to include in the film, because I didn't want people to judge the character of the minister in a good light before they would have their own questions about him. And the story is that after the fire, him as a patient activist in Vienna basically organized very fast in the first 24 hours, organized with the burn unit in Vienna to receive 2 patients from Romania. And then he fought with the Romanian authorities to let 2 patients go to Vienna and be treated in Vienna. One of them was Alex Hoxha, which we learned in the film that they refused to transfer him for 3 days, and that was fatal for him. And the second one was Teddy. And she was in a much worse state than Alex, and she was transferred also to Vienna. And so they basically share, I think they even shared a room or something like that. But the tragic part is that the healthcare authorities in Romania decided to send over their data, but without information that they were infected. And so in Vienna, basically, the doctor said, like, why are these people on the toughest antibiotics existing in this world if they are not infected? So let's find the right antibiotic cocktail for them, for their bodies, not to, to release a bit pressure of their bodies. And that was fatal for Alex, because he was infected and they didn't know, and it took a too long time to find the right antibiotic cocktail. But Teddy was lucky that they pretty fast found the right cocktail of antibiotics to which the body responded, and she survived. So basically, when in the film you see that they meet for the first time, she comes with a group of victims to the minister's office to discuss things. He says something like, "Oh, I never saw you before. You look great," or something like that. And that's because they knew about each other. They knew their common story, basically, that it was him that rescued her life, but they never met before. It was really the first time they met. So that was the backstory of it. And we started pretty soon to film with her. She was clearly distinctive and an enigma in a way. But in order to gain the trust of the victims and of the families, what was very important, there was another character in the club which filmed the concert. He was friends with the band. He was a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, and gathered 5 cameramen to film the concert. And this character is Mihai Grecia, who barely survived after over a month in coma. Not all camera persons survived. And I met him by accident in the office of a friend when he was out of coma, telling him his story. And so I went to the office and found him there. I thought he's dead. And just sat down, listened to his story. And then I said, "Mihai, listen, I started to make a film about your story. Why don't you want to join the band? Do you feel up to it to become part of a film team?" And so in between his sessions for recuperation, because he was also burned and everything, he was also every day coming, to the film set and learned to do sound, and became basically also the sound man and my very close also creative collaborator, because we talked all the time about things and shared thoughts and so forth. So he was present in part of the shooting days, and he was part of the team. But because he was on the team, I think the victims needed a shorter time to trust us, because they were so assaulted by all media during that time that it would have been very hard for them to understand why I do things differently, or why I'm a filmmaker and different from journalists that just want to film fast and release it on TV in the evening. But because Mihai was on the team, they trusted that we have good intentions.
Was he your source also for the footage of the fire that you included?
Yes. The footage of the fire is basically, it was a wide angle cinema pocket camera in front of the stage. And the girlfriend of one of the cameramen who did not survive basically pulled it out by its tripod when the fire erupted. And so that camera filmed on until the lens popped from the heat and the sound went on. And that was maybe the most horrifying thing I've ever went through in the editing room. So after seeing it the first time, I think I put it away for months.
And I mean, at some point you have to come back to it. So what was that? How did you sort of grapple with it from an editing standpoint? I mean, obviously, you're not going to unsee those images. So it's very powerful that it's in there.
Yeah, it was a long, it was a long process, and I had my force in bag and thought, no, I can't, why should I? And I really start to try to understand, what do you do if you have, let's say, image from the Nazi lagers, or, what do you do? And I think Mihai was also important to encourage me to address it courageously, basically, to use it. And I think the reason I decided to use the footage is because I felt that the only way to make it clear or make it sensible to a cinema audience, what it really means, that everyone's life can change in seconds, that you can end up in the need of a functioning society around you that has to save your life. The only way is to show it. The only way is to understand and experience in real time what it means if you are trapped, and if in seconds something comes over you that you cannot control. And now with the pandemic, I feel in a way that it became, for me personally at least, a metaphor for the way the pandemic swept over the globe. We all thought like it's never going to happen. And then suddenly we were all in it and really in need of a functioning society. And in the countries where it did not function, like in the US, for example, you had a calamity in handling the COVID crisis.
Was there a parallel kind of story investigation that led to major changes in building code supervision, or all of the things that may have helped people escape the fire in the first place? I know that it led to a change in the government, but I'm curious if the same kind of corruption was really sort of like brought to light as a result of it.
No, not really. I mean, they tried to change the way public venues are functioning or are authorized, but to be honest, not enough has happened since then. I mean, it's still too much the responsibility of the owners. I think they only try to find ways in which not to make the state too responsible for that. Firemen are more, for sure, the fire department is more rigid with the rules, because in this case, I think the fire department authorized it, and there might have been some bribes. And I think even the two firemen that authorized it and checked upon the club are going to go to jail for a very long time.
Just one last major thing I wanted to ask about was, because, as you mentioned, we go into this pandemic and we know that there's this populist change that, the elections that we see at the end of the film does obviously imply that the future is not necessarily going to be bright, especially when it comes to handling health crises in the country. What was the actual ramifications of those elections on the things that the Minister of Health had tried to do?
Oh, they were bad. I mean, they reversed most of the things he did. The government that came in was highly corrupt and even tried to legalize corruption. And we had mass demonstrations because of it, even bigger than those after the collective fire. And the thing is that I think what was important for me to understand also with the narrative is that, a society does not change by the pace that we as individuals understand things and change, or, want to change. And trust cannot be, you cannot win the trust of a society in politics in a short time. And that you can see in the film, for sure. You have, let's say, a better intended government, but nevertheless, I mean, the first Minister of Health in that government was basically also a crook that was brought down by the press investigation. and then the next one comes in for 6 months. That's not enough to win over the trust of the people. But that said, these investigations and this whole year nevertheless planted something. And also what came after the shock of this super corrupt government coming in, a super populistic and incompetent and corrupt government coming in. And the same shock that you had in the States, right? And that started something, that started, people became more aware that they really have to shape their democracy, that they really have to get involved. And in the meantime, you know, new parties appeared, reformatory parties of young people that went into politics in order to change things. Also, Vlad Voiculescu became, you know, the minister became part of them. And they won in the last elections enough votes to take over also mayories and really start to fight corruption and the stealing of public funds in the mayories that took place. Even this wonderful mayor in the film, the woman was replaced. Since last Christmas, even Vlad Voiculescu is back in the ministry as Minister of Health.
Oh.
So, yeah. So
really?
things, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's great.
How did that happen?
Because he is part of a new party that got enough votes in order to enter a coalition, into a coalition government.
Yeah.
And so they got in this coalition government, they got several ministries.
I mean, that's a positive outcome, particularly in the middle of a pandemic.
It is positive, but it cares, or you know, I think it does also care a lot of potential for bad things, because these people, like now in the US, you know, these people come in and the expectations we all have from them are very high. And I think that if they don't meet the expectations, or anything happens that really makes them so vulnerable, you know, the next elections can be even worse than what we had 4 years ago everywhere around the world.
That's true. Well, hopefully the film will remind people of the work that he was doing and the altruism with which he approaches his work. Have you found that the release of the film has, I guess, continued to help keep awareness high about the corruption, but also about the people that are fighting it?
I think so. You know, it's hard to measure that. What we can measure is what we know from the journalists, that the number of whistleblowers exploded once we released the film. So they had, I mean, not only with our journalists that we follow in the film, but also with others, but the ones who follow in the film, for example, before we released the film, they had per day around 10 valid leads towards corruption or injustice from whistleblowers on the different channels, be it WhatsApp, email, you know, whatever. And once we released the film, that went up to 80 to 120 per day. So people really, you know, a lot of people saw the film, and I guess it made them think about, you know, which side they want to be on and if they want to keep their eyes closed or not.
Well, I'm very excited to see how the film continues to do, especially with your 2 Oscar nominations. It's really a phenomenal achievement, especially considering that you're the first Romanian film nominated for Best International Film, when Romania has produced masterpieces for decades now.
Totally, yeah.
So long overdue, but so well earned by this film particularly. So congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah. No, it was, I mean, for sure, I think that 4 months, 3 weeks should have been at least nominated, for sure. Yeah.
At the very least, yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing this film and everything that it took to make it. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
Best wishes for the Oscars.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, we'll see.